For the first time in 23 years, Russia Day is cancelled. Moscow is waiting for permission from Ukraine again. The traditional Russia Day concert on Red Square, meant for a day sacred to the Kremlin, has been cancelled in the Russian Federation. According to media reports, the event titled "In the Unity of Peoples Lies the Strength of Russia" was moved to a smaller venue, the Mosovet Cultural Center. Previously, performances by famous Russian artists were planned for the concert, but everything was cancelled due to fear. No official reasons for the cancellation are given. However, this is not the first case of restricting large-scale events in central Moscow. It seems that in the capital of the Russian Federation, they are increasingly looking back at security issues before holding loud celebrations, and jokes are even appearing in the information space that you can't go anywhere without Ukraine anymore. Urgent! For the first time, Putin is cancelling Russia Day in fear of Ukraine. The dictator is in a total panic. The bunker man is so afraid that he is hiding not only himself, but also his daughters, grandchildren, and inner circle. And also a secret departure point, which has long since been figured out. Dozens of air defense systems, an underground bunker, and the strictest security measures. Will they really help? But that's not all. Anti-drone nets near the residence. Are the occupiers really preparing for a repeat of Operation Cobweb? And also strikes on the most protected facility in the country. Why is the Kremlin sharply strengthening the defense of Valdai? All the details in just a moment. Greetings! This is the Ukraine Today channel, Andrei Silikov, and the latest events. Putin is so afraid of assassination that he has hidden even his own daughters and grandchildren in a bunker. Media outlets have revealed new details about the dictator's family life. According to a journalistic investigation, Vladimir Putin ordered his two eldest daughters, 40-year-old Maria Vorontsova and 39-year-old Katerina Tikhonova, along with their children, to move to a highly protected complex in Valdai, where his inner circle already resides. This is stated in an article by the Daily Express tabloid. We are talking about a closed residence in the middle of the woods, located more than 400 kilometers from Moscow. That is where, according to journalist Alina Kabaeva, also lives with her two sons. The security of the facility attracts special attention. It is reported that due to the growing threat of drone attacks, the territory of the complex has literally been turned into a fortress. Currently, the complex is protected by 27 air defense towers located in double defensive rings. This is significantly more than 2 years ago. In addition to a powerful air defense system, an underground bunker is also equipped on the territory of the residence, where residents of the complex can stay in case of danger. According to the publication, recently the Russian leadership has been seriously concerned about issues of its own security. The Financial Times reported that officials even audited the Kremlin's surveillance systems and temporarily shut down parts of the networks due to fears of cyber espionage. Journalists link this to reports of successful operations by Western intelligence services against high-ranking officials of other authoritarian regimes. Interestingly, among the residents of the Valdai complex, journalists do not mention Luisa Rozova, whom Russian and Western media call another daughter of Putin. According to press reports, she is currently mostly outside of Russia. In fact, it seems that Putin is becoming increasingly isolated from the outside world and is trying to protect not only himself, but also his closest relatives. If before they talked about the bunker grandpa, now it seems the entire family of the Kremlin ruler is living in bunker mode. And while Putin hides his daughters, grandchildren, and inner circle in a super-protected complex in Valdai, security measures continue to be installed around the residence. It seems the fear of Ukrainian drones in the Kremlin is only growing. Russian media report that special anti-drone nets have been installed over truck parking lots on the M10 highway near Valdai. Interestingly, these structures appear just a few kilometers from Putin's residence. The founder of the investigative group believes that the main goal of these nets is not to protect trucks from drone strikes.
The nets are not intended to protect trucks from drone attacks, but to prevent the possible launch of drones from the trucks themselves.
In his opinion, the Russian authorities seriously fear a repeat of the Ukrainian Operation Web, where attack drones can be launched from hidden positions deep in the rear.
If a truck with hidden drones parks in such an area, the net could interfere with the launch of the devices.
All in all, it's becoming clear. A whole multi-level security belt is being formed around the dictator's residence. If before they built protection against missiles and drones in Valdai, now it seems they are even afraid of ordinary trucks that might be near the residence. Meanwhile, as our new long-range weapons strike terror deep in the rear, the entire Russian southern front is rapidly turning into a zone of total logistical collapse. The vaunted land corridor to Crimea is cut, bridges are burning, and the Sea of Azov has become a deadly trap for enemy ships. Watch the report to see how methodical strikes by the defense forces are causing the Russian supply system to collapse along its entire length.
Primorsk is burning, guys. They're getting hammered in Primorsk.
The AFU are breaking through to the Sea of Azov. The enemy's logistics in the Azov region are already screaming for help. However, the unmanned systems forces offer the occupiers only a fiery destruction. The south already smells of a new large-scale operation.
The geography of the strikes covered about 20 regions of Russia, as well as the waters of the Black and Azov Seas.
Bridges, air defenses, oil depots, substations, factories, drone warehouses, and enemy troop concentrations are being systematically destroyed. So, what's the word? The special military operation is still going according to plan.
And that's not all. Ukrainian drones have carried out a major overhaul of the occupation's shipping, simultaneously targeting 5 cargo vessels serving the Russian army's needs. The strikes hit targets near Berdyansk, Mariupol, and even in the Yalta area of the Donetsk region. For the Kremlin, this is far more painful than it might appear at first glance. For years, the occupiers have used Azov ports to move ammunition, fuel, equipment, and other supplies, without which the war effort quickly stalls. Now, every voyage is like a maritime lottery, where instead of reaching port, you might encounter a Ukrainian drone. Adding to the symbolism is that these very ports were used not just for military logistics, but also to export stolen Ukrainian resources, especially grain. It seems that for part of the Russian fleet, the export season is gradually turning into a season of major problems. And the Sea of Azov is looking less like a safe rear area and more like a high-risk zone. Meanwhile, the transport blockade of Crimea is gaining momentum. The occupiers were forced to close another vital crossing to the peninsula, the bridge from Henichesk to the Arabat Spit. And that's the second key artery to be knocked out of action in recent days. For Russian logistics, the situation is increasingly like a nightmare, with fewer roads and more problems. Petro Andriushchenko, head of the Center for the Study of Occupation, reports that the strike likely hit a bridge near the Henichesk-Arabat Spit. Combined with issues in the Chonhar direction, this creates an extremely grim picture for the Russian forces. What was recently considered a secure rear is becoming a bottleneck, making it harder to move troops, equipment, and ammunition. This is particularly painful given the ongoing fuel crisis. Following a series of Ukrainian strikes on oil depots and logistics hubs, the occupiers are already facing fuel supply disruptions. Now, every newly blocked route only intensifies the impact. It seems Russian logistics is now operating on a principle: the longer the road to Crimea, the shorter the fuel in the tanks. And most troubling for the Kremlin is that problems are mounting from all sides at once. Ukrainian drones are increasingly hunting fuel tankers and trucks deep in the rear, while land routes to the peninsula are under constant watch. If Crimea was once called Russia's unsinkable aircraft carrier, it now looks more like an island being slowly but surely cut off from supplies. Things are also unsettled in the Donetsk region. Russians are recording advice for traveling the Mariupol-Donetsk highway. They say to drive at least 160 kilometers per hour and keep a close eye on the sky in case some surprise comes flying in.
Maximum vigilance. Watch the sky. Don't turn on any music, don't smoke, and don't drink coffee. The task is to look at the sky so that it's as clear as possible that nothing is hanging over your head.
There's no peace for the enemy, even where they counted on a quiet rear. It seems the occupiers in Mariupol and the Azov region are stuck in an endless series called Impact Flash Blackout. What was supposed to be a showcase of restoration for Russian propaganda increasingly resembles a territory where the lights go out more often than good news appears for the occupation administration. The most interesting thing is that the strike on the substation isn't about light bulbs in apartments at all. For the Russian army, this is a strike at the very heart of logistics. Key supply routes for the southern front pass through Mariupol, and the railway, on which the occupiers placed a huge bet after problems with the Crimean bridge, quickly turns into expensive scrap metal without electricity. No power means no normal train movement, which means problems arise with the delivery of fuel, equipment, and ammunition. As a result, the Russians have to transport cargo in vehicle convoys. And here the most unpleasant part begins. The roads get clogged with trucks and fuel tankers, which become excellent targets for Ukrainian drones. It turns out to be quite an ironic picture. Trying to save their logistics, the occupiers themselves turn it into a long line of potential targets. And along with the light, the Kremlin's main myth of a safe rear disappears. Mariupol, which Russian propaganda has tried for years to show as a symbol of stability under occupation, increasingly resembles a city under constant fire control. And the more often substations go out there, the harder it is to explain to local residents why this quiet rear lives by the laws of a frontline zone. The picture for the Kremlin looks less and less controlled. The Azov coast, land routes to Crimea, fuel logistics, and rear hubs, all this is gradually turning into a system where every new supply artery lives only until the first failure. Russian propaganda is still trying to sell the idea of stability, but reality makes its own adjustments every time. Cargo moves slower, routes become longer, and risks get closer. And in this new geography of war, the main question is no longer where the next strike will be, but how many more routes this logistical structure will withstand before it starts to crumble along its entire length.
And while the occupiers' logistics are crumbling at the front, in the Kremlin itself they are already openly preparing to topple Putin. Behind the pretty picture of unity, a tough game of survival has begun. And now there's only one question. Which of his own will be the first to deliver the final blow to the dictator? How is Putin's system devouring itself? Watch further.
For decades, Putin held on to power as if time in Russia had simply stopped, and the Kremlin itself exists by separate laws of physics, where everything is subject to one decision-making center. The system looked monolithic, the opposition doomed to silence. Any doubts quickly dissolved in the propaganda noise. But even the strongest structures have a breaking point. What for years seemed like an unshakable throne increasingly resembles a field of internal struggle, where any movement can already trigger the process of power redistribution. While the Kremlin officially continues to project monolithic unity, behind the scenes it seems a completely different math is beginning. Survival. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky stated that there has long been no unified line within Putin's inner circle. According to him, roughly half want to continue the war, while the other half is quietly looking for an exit button. Meanwhile, the Russian economy is slowly but surely entering a state that Russian businessmen themselves prefer not to say out loud. According to Zelensky, even among people with big money and connections, there's a growing understanding war is no longer a strategy, but a financial collapse in installments. And while some in Putin's circle continue to play at being a great empire, others are already silently counting their losses and looking for a way not to end up under the rubble of this structure. In fact, as the president hints, the Kremlin today is less like a fortress and more like a room where some people keep shouting, "Hold on!" while others are already discreetly looking for the exit. And most interestingly, both sides are currently forced to sit at the same table, pretending that this is what stability looks like. Recently, everyone was shocked by an event covered by the Financial Times. A special video monitoring system that tracked the security of Putin and his inner circle was suddenly taken out of the game. And while official explanations sound dry and technical, more and more people are asking a much more interesting question. Who decided to turn off the electronic eyes guarding the Kremlin's most important residents, and why?
According to one source, the system, which is separate from the nearly 300,000 cameras in Moscow, was only turned back on after engineers thoroughly checked it. They tried to isolate Putin's security system from the internet. This panic in the Kremlin arose after Israeli intelligence gathered numerous video recordings from Iranian road cameras to determine the exact location of the Ayatollah.
Formally, everything is explained as a concern for security. After high-profile stories of intelligence agencies from various countries using video networks, Moscow allegedly decided to cut off strategic systems from the outside world. But much darker versions are already circulating in political corridors. When security suddenly turns off its own radars, a logical question arises. Are they protecting the target or, on the contrary, leaving it without cover?
The system was restarted only after engineers thoroughly checked it, aiming to completely isolate it from the internet, the publication reported.
All this looks especially interesting against the backdrop of statements by Russian security officials about the vulnerability of digital infrastructure. FSB head Alexander Bortnikov effectively admitted that the giant surveillance system could become a weak point in the entire structure. But many observers are pointing to another aspect. If something extraordinary happens in the Kremlin tomorrow, the answer is already prepared in advance. The cameras were unreliable, the network was under threat, technical problems hindered control. A convenient version for any future surprises. And now the main intrigue is no longer about why the cameras were turned off. Something else is much more interesting. If in a state where control has long been a religion, key elements of its own surveillance system suddenly start being turned off, then perhaps the greatest threat to the Kremlin is no longer outside its walls, but somewhere inside. Hidden hostility has been building up in Putin's inner circle for a long time. Former pro-government blogger Ilya Remezlo stated that he does not rule out a scenario where the Russian dictator is removed in a coup within the next year. And this is coming from a man who was part of the system for a long time before abruptly changing his tune. These statements were made in an interview with Ksenia Sobchak, a figure often ironically called the Kremlin's goddaughter in Russian political folklore. According to Remezlo, the system is already bursting at the seams, and the main cause of the crisis, in his view, is personified by Putin.
The person at the very top who controls everything is Vladimir Putin. It's obvious, everyone knows it.
Remezlo also emphasized that he is addressing those who are still within the system but are already having doubts. He speaks of creating a platform for those afraid to speak out against Putin and urges them not to fear, hinting at inevitable changes. His rhetoric sounds like an attempt to unite scattered elements of the elite who no longer feel their former confidence under one banner.
I am using this interview to reach out to those who are still inside the system. Do not be afraid, we will definitely win. There is little time left and everything will be decided. I want to create a platform for those who are afraid to speak out against Vladimir Putin.
Remezlo himself predicts that Russia could undergo a deep transformation as early as late 2026 or early 2027. He is not talking about a classic coup, but a quiet change of the system, a scenario more like historical turning points than open conflict. In his interpretation, it's a moment when the country wakes up completely different, without loud gunshots, but with a totally new power structure.
It will be very quiet, just like in 1953. We will wake up in a different country.
And it turns out to be a historically familiar scenario, where the system speaks the language of control but lives by the logic of internal calculations and quiet backroom deals. The Kremlin still tries to look like an unshakable structure, but it increasingly resembles a mechanism where every gear thinks not of moving forward, but of what happens when the next one breaks. And in such systems, the greatest danger isn't even an external blow, but the moment when everyone inside simultaneously decides that eternity is no longer on their schedule.
And while the Kremlin elites sharpen their knives behind the dictator's back, Putin himself is rapidly losing the battle with his main enemy, his own failing health. Rumors of his serious illnesses can no longer be hidden behind the screen of propaganda, and every new public appearance by the bunker dweller only confirms the worst fears. What is actually happening to the leader's body and why his time is running out, you will find out right now.
To live forever. It seems his main fear is not NATO, not sanctions, and not even Ukrainian drones. His main enemy is time. And while the Russian economy suffocates under the weight of war, the master of the Kremlin himself seems to be waging his own war against old age and death. According to Western media, tens of billions of dollars have already been spent on the longevity project in Russia. Genetic therapy, growing human organs, animals, bioprinting living tissues, experiments on cell rejuvenation. All this is more like the plot of a sci-fi thriller than the state program of a country at war and facing economic hardships. It seems the Kremlin is more concerned with repairing its own ruler than with the future of its own citizens. Particular attention is drawn to the fact that for years Putin has been publicly fascinated by ideas of near-infinite life. He talks about organ replacement, body rejuvenation, and technologies of the future with such enthusiasm as if he plans to personally test their effectiveness over the next few centuries. And talk of ice baths and cryochambers only adds a touch of desperate struggle against the relentless calendar to this image. However, the more the Kremlin talks about defeating aging, the more questions arise. Critics point out there are many loud statements, but significantly fewer convincing results. Some even suggest that scientists are simply telling the Russian leader what he wants to hear. After all, when you're over 70 and you don't want to let go of power, the prospect of outsmarting death becomes extremely attractive. The irony is that while Putin seeks a recipe for immortality, his appearance increasingly becomes the subject of new rumors and discussions. Instead of the image of an eternal ruler, the world increasingly sees a man desperately trying to prove to nature that its laws don't apply to him. But history has shown time and again, death can be ignored, delayed, or feared, but no one has yet managed to sign a lifelong contract with it. Talk of Putin's health problems has been circulating for many years. He is regularly attributed with various diagnoses, from neurological diseases to oncology. Official Moscow, as usual, categorically denies everything, yet videos and photos repeatedly provide new grounds for discussion. Either Putin grips the table too tightly during a meeting, as if it's the last pillar of stability, or he moves so cautiously, as if every step requires approval from a separate Kremlin commission. Putin's latest appearance at the parade in Moscow has sparked a new wave of questions. British journalists noted that the Russian dictator looked noticeably haggard, aged, and unnaturally bloated. Social networks immediately exploded with discussions, and users began to wonder if the ceremonial uniform hides the increasingly obvious problems of the Kremlin's master. The Daily Mail notes that this time, even a carefully prepared television image couldn't fully mask the changes in the Russian leader's appearance. A man who for years was shown as a symbol of strength and control increasingly gives the impression of a politician on whose shoulders the weight of his own decisions has fallen. And the longer the war continues, the harder it is to hide the fatigue behind official ceremonies and parade speeches.
A short, frail man, bent under the weight of a load he can no longer lift. Either Putin himself is afraid, or he's being intimidated in this way, fueling fear, which leads to paranoia. He looks lonely and isolated inside his security bubble.
A wave of rumors hit the Kremlin after photos of the dictator's hands were leaked online. In the published footage, veins, dry skin, and sharply defined tendons were clearly visible. People online immediately began to speculate. Experts and commentators once again spoke of possible health problems for a man who has been trying to look like an eternal ruler for over a quarter of a century.
Something is clearly wrong with Putin's hands. Besides being elbow-deep in blood, the veins on them are also very noticeably swollen.
But this is far from the first episode. Earlier, footage from Putin's meeting with Trump also sparked heated discussions when users noticed his unsteady gait. On social media, people joked that the Russian president's legs look like they've wanted to retire long before their owner. From time to time, much more serious assumptions surface. Various leaks and unofficial reports have included versions about oncological diseases or Parkinson's disease. There is no evidence for these claims, but the rumors continue to take on a life of their own and regularly return to the media space.
I can confirm that he has been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease, but it is progressing. Putin is regularly injected with potent drugs and pain-killing shots.
At the same time, other observers urge not to look for sensations where there may be ordinary age-related changes. After decades in power and endless attempts to maintain the image of an eternal leader, even the most carefully constructed picture is starting to crack. And perhaps that is the main paradox of the whole story. A man who for decades tried to create the image of an all-powerful and irreplaceable ruler today increasingly resembles a man fighting an unequal battle with his age. Billions for longevity experiments, talk of organ replacement, and dreams of an almost infinite life look like an attempt to outplay humanity's oldest rival, time. But while Kremlin scientists search for the recipe for immortality, the calendar continues to relentlessly turn its pages. And it seems that it is this opponent that makes Putin nervous much more than sanctions, NATO, or even Ukrainian drones.
And what do you think about these events? Share your opinion in the comments, give a like, and stay informed about the main things. More to come.